At the time of recording this video, it is currently September 11th, 2018. So I'm going to do something a little bit different for this video. I'm going to tell a story about how me and my family actually became aware of the events that were occurring at September 11th. Because, oddly enough, we didn't really know what was going on, or at least the specifics of what was going on, until one day afterwards. And there are actually reasons why, and I'll get into that later. Anyway, now before I tell you the story, I'm going to give you a little bit of backstory about this fictional route I'm working on. It takes place in a fictional universe where the United States purchased the bullet train system, and bullet trains are being built over the whole of the United States and even in some parts of Canada and Mexico. Now, the bullet train doesn't replace Amtrak, it merely supplements it. It adds to the already existing systems. It's pretty much a faster way to get to some of the major Amtrak stations, and it also services some areas that Amtrak doesn't run to, like in this case, the Outer Banks of North Carolina. I'm going to try to build the entire Outer Banks in this game. I'm not sure if the game will even let me build a route that large, because I'm essentially building something as large as the entire coastline of North Carolina. But I'll try and see how far it lets me do this. Anyway, what you just saw was the Ocracoke Village Station, which is an express station. The local and express trains stop there. The builders of this route expect to have a lot of tourist traffic to that area, so they built an 8-track station, 4 tracks for local trains and 4 tracks for express trains. They also expect a lot of trains to be traveling to Cape Hatteras, but there's less platforms at that station. Either way, this is a bridge that links Hatteras Island with the island that the Ocracoke Lighthouse is located on. Generally, the only way to get to Ocracoke from Cape Hatteras is to ride a what do you call those things? A car shuttle. You can basically drive your car onto a boat, and the boat will take you to this village. I'm not sure if you have to pay for it or not. Oh, it's called a car ferry. But this bullet train will pretty much eliminate that service completely, or at least partially. Because, you know, if you prefer to get there by car, you'll still be taking the car ferry instead. But now you can go from the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, and then you can hop on the bullet train and take it to the Ocracoke Lighthouse pretty much seamlessly. The train will travel on a bridge over this large body of water, and it'll come back to the island of Ocracoke. Now, I really like the water in Trainz Simulator 2019 because it actually reflects the sun, which I don't think the other water did on Trains: A New Era. Now, you may be wondering why the Ocracoke train station was underground. Well, as it turns out, the creators of this section of track had weird plans for this entire area. They were originally going to purchase the Ocracoke Lighthouse from its owners, and they were going to place it on top of an underground station. Basically, they wanted to be set up similar to the Madison Square Garden at New York Penn Station, where you can take the train and then just climb up the stairs to get to the Madison Square Garden. They wanted to make it so that there would be an concourse underground. There would be a station underneath the concourse, and in this concourse you can also climb up a series of stairs that will take you straight to the bottom floor of the lighthouse, and you can climb to the top from there. However, the owners of the lighthouse didn't really like this idea that much, so instead they refused, and they were unable to purchase the lighthouse for this purpose. So instead they built the station next to the lighthouse. It's still underground though, because they couldn't get permission to build above ground in this village. It would disrupt too much of the area. Also, the station that they were planning on building was too tall, and it was going to block the view of the lighthouse from the ocean. So they couldn't get permission to build a station above ground here. Instead, they decided to build it below ground, similar in design to a subway station. It's not completely underground though. It's actually open cut, just like some of the open cut stations on the New York City subway. The main issue was that it was too tall and it was blocking the view of the lighthouse. Anyway, this is a railroad crossing that crosses North Carolina State Route number 12, which is pretty much the highway that runs along from Ocracoke to, I think, Currituck Beach Lighthouse. So you can pretty much drive to all of these lighthouses by car. This is going to be a high-speed railroad crossing. Now, originally I was planning on making a bridge, but I couldn't get the railroad high enough to go over the road in time, so I decided to keep it at ground level. I could also submerge the road and put a railroad bridge over it, but I was worried that during a hurricane the road might flood, and that wouldn't be pretty good at all. I try to come up with solutions that'll work on everyone's part, not just be beneficial to the railroad. Now, you'll notice that a lot of these tracks use wooden ties instead of concrete ties. As it turns out, North Carolina had a lower budget than most of the rest of the country when building the bullet train lines. They couldn't afford concrete ties on all sections of the track, so they switched to wood because it was cheaper. They still use concrete ties in certain locations though. While we're on the subject of hurricanes in North Carolina, there's apparently a hurricane headed for North Carolina at this time. And interesting fact, I work at a shipping company and my job is to load boxes that people ordered onto trailers. And all of the trailers that were going to North Carolina and South Carolina were almost completely filled with generators because a lot of people were ordering generators. I've never seen so many of one product in the truck before. Usually it's just a mixture of things from Amazon, a mixture of things from Walmart, a mixture of things from a bunch of different companies because a lot of people ship with this company. But yeah, it was almost entirely generators on these trailers. That's not a bad thing, obviously. They're just trying to make sure they're prepared in case there's a power outage in the area. Now that I think about it, the lighthouses on the Outer Banks, North Carolina get their power from the regular power grid, I believe. So if the power goes out, I hope that these lighthouses are equipped with an additional backup way of obtaining electricity. They should probably consider just switching to solar power. I mean, there's a lot of solar energy in North Carolina. It gets really hot there in the summer, and there's a lot of sun there, so I don't see why they can't switch to solar power. I mean, most of the lighthouses in Alaska are solar powered, and there's barely any sun there, so if they can do it there, they should be able to do it here in North Carolina. Anyway, getting back to the story, we didn't have cable. We received TV signals using the antenna method, which sadly doesn't exist anymore. But back then, if you had antennas, you could hook them up to your TV. Sometimes you could even use a metal coat hanger in place of the antenna if you didn't have one. And you could point the antennas in different directions to receive TV signals. We, of course, loved this method a lot more than cable because it was free as far as I can remember. I think it was just like radio, where all you had to do was point the antenna in certain directions and you can get signals from broadcasters. Either way, on September 11th, the morning of that day anyway, we were just watching TV normally, the same as we normally do, and all of a sudden, the screen just went static. Now, if you're young, you probably don't know this, but back in that time, when a TV did not have a signal, it would make a loud, staticky sound, just like how radios sound when they can't get a signal. And it's very loud and obnoxious. Either way, usually when a picture went out on our TV, it was never that bad. Usually, it was just that either the picture would be fuzzy, it would sound a little bit staticky or distorted, but it never went completely static like that. So we were a little bit worried. We were like, something's not right. Like it's not usual for us to lose the entire signal, but we did that day. And I remember we pointed the antennas in all different directions. There wasn't a single direction we could point it at and get a signal. And we were like, well, that's strange. This doesn't usually happen. Something must be up. That evening, we got a call from my grandmother, who also lives in Plainfield. We lived in Plainfield at the time, if I forgot to mention that. So yeah, we received a phone call from her telling us that the World Trade Center was attacked, and we knew at that time that that must have been why we couldn't get a signal. As it turned out, the signal we were getting was coming from the antenna spire on top of the North Tower, which was also a TV broadcasting antenna. But when the tower collapsed, we could not get a signal at all, because obviously that tower was what was providing us with that signal. So without it, we couldn't receive a signal. So we couldn't even watch the news and figure out what was going on. We were completely in the dark that day. The next day, we got cable and we turned it to the news channel to see what was going on. And I remember it was a very horrifying thing to see. I mean, I was only 7 years old when I saw it, so obviously that was a lot to take in for a child. I remember thinking to myself, why would anyone do something like this? I mean, at first I thought that it must have been an accident. I mean, I couldn't imagine at 7 years old that anyone would ever take a plane and purposefully crash it into a building. So I thought maybe it happened by accident, but then someone told me that it was on purpose, and that was really hard for me to understand as a child. I just couldn't understand why anyone would just take a plane and purposefully crash it into a building. And even to this day, I can't understand why anyone would do that. Like, I mean, I know the reason why we were attacked, but it still doesn't make any sense. But yeah, that's how we found out about the attacks. We found out via a phone call, because prior to that, we didn't have a TV signal and could not turn it to the news, and we just weren't aware of what was going on at that time. We didn't find out until a day later when we got cable. You know, I remember watching an episode of Adam Ruins Everything where they were talking about how supposedly airport security isn't worth it, and basically that is a waste of time, money, and resources. But I disagree. Now, their big argument in that episode was that they only guard against the last way we were attacked. But, you know, I've seen the last way we were attacked on the news and everything, and I'm glad that they protect against that, even if it's the only thing they protect against, because I don't want something like that to happen a second time. I'm glad that it is no longer possible for someone to just climb into a plane and hijack it and crash it into a skyscraper, even if that's the only thing, the only specific event they guard against, and even if it's highly unlikely for it to happen again. I'm glad it just can't possibly happen in the future. So I personally don't agree with that argument that it's a waste of time. If it means that that can no longer happen again, I think it's a good thing. Here is a map of the current Outer Banks area that I have built so far. It's actually pretty large. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to fit the entire coast of North Carolina up here, but if it gets to a point where the game has a problem with loading the entire map, then I'll just stop there and build an extension later on. I remember one time when I was a kid, I actually tried to build a route that was pretty much all of the United States, like every single railroad in the United States, from coast to coast, from Maine to Alaska, and from California to Florida. But eventually the game stopped loading the map because it was too big. I mean, it loaded it, but it took like several hours to load. So I'm like, okay, maybe there's a specific limit where it's just too big and you can't do that. Now, I'm about to show you the train station at the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, which is another completed one that I have. They expect for there to be a lot of passengers traveling to this station. In fact, they expect the majority of trains that are headed for Cape Hatteras to be sold out. However, even though the express trains skip the station without stopping, all the local trains have at least 16 cars on them to accommodate for the large amount of people that will be traveling to this lighthouse. Even so, they still expect the majority of the trains to be sold out. And there you see the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse in the background. I wish I could find sound effects with longer sound files in them. Maybe like 15 minutes of just the waves crashing. I'll see if I can make a sound effect like that of my own in the future. But anyway, here is a large station that services the Cape Hatteras National Seashore. This station is on ground level because it was cheaper that way. But when budget allows, some stations will be above ground whenever possible. They couldn't afford to in this station, so they just put it at ground level and built a boardwalk/railroad crossing that allows passengers to walk to the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. Now, you may have noticed that this model of the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse had a Fresnel lens inside it instead of a DCV-224 Aero beacon. I couldn't find a model that had one of those. It doesn't really matter though, because I can't figure out how to get the lighthouses to turn on at night in this game. I'm not sure how to create a script for that. So even if I could find one, I wouldn't know how to animate it. Now, this station is pretty large, but most of the people crowd up towards the north end of the station because it's closest to the exit, and there's only one exit at this station. Because they couldn't afford to build a second exit on the south end of the station. This is the exit for the station. People walk down the stairs and it takes them to a railroad crossing. This boardwalk also leads to the beach. But you want to get to the lighthouse, you have to turn left and dangerously cross these tracks. Most people protest the existence of these types of railroad crossings, especially specifically for pedestrians. But it was the only way they could afford to make a crossing that allowed people to go between the two sides of the station to the lighthouse and to the beach. So it was the method they went with. It was considered the cheapest method for this specific situation. As you can see, you don't have to worry about the train station blocking the view of the lighthouse because, one, the lighthouse is already above ground anyway and the station was built down the hill from it. And two, the lighthouse is pretty tall anyway. So there was no problem with building this station at ground level. The railroad crossing has 4 sets of lights, one for each track. If the light on the bottom is flashing, it means the train is traveling towards the track that's closest to you. If the one at the top is flashing, it means that the train coming towards the track that's furthest away from you. And this is the original foundation of the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, where it actually originally stood before it was moved 1,600 feet to protect it from erosion. Speaking of which, I actually was there when they moved the lighthouse. Now, if multiple lights are flashing at that railroad crossing I just mentioned earlier, it means that multiple trains are approaching the crossing. Now here, the land curves sharply to the right, but I didn't want the train to have to do that because it would slow it down. So it travels in a straight line on a several mile long bridge that links it back to the mainland, where it then crosses North Carolina State Route number 12 and turns slightly to the left. I'm going to try my best to make this railroad crossing very safe so that there are no incidents at it. A high-speed train hitting a car could actually be pretty deadly, not just for the car but also for the train. There have been TGV trains in France that derailed while hitting a truck at a railroad crossing. In most cases, though, the people in the train survived. The TGV trains are actually designed to derail in a perfectly straight line. which is actually a pretty cool design. That wouldn't work here in the United States though, because there are too many curved sections of track. If a train derailed in a straight line, the chances are it would still crash into a house or a tree or something. So that design would be pretty much worthless here, where our country is filled with winding, curved sections of track. Anyway, after that, the line travels slightly uphill and it crosses this bridge. This bridge crosses over the Hatteras Inlet crab spawning sanctuary. So obviously boats need to travel through this area. I'm not sure how high the bridge is going to have to be to fit over the ships. I'll try to make it tall enough for that, but if not, a drawbridge might have to be built. That would be a huge problem though, because drawbridges slow down railroads. Boats get the right of way over all traffic, whether it's a car or a train, at a drawbridge. So even if it's a high-speed train like a bullet train, it would probably still have to stop for a boat anyway to have the bridge opened. Now there's probably ways around that. For example, you could probably tell the boats to schedule ahead of time so that the railroad knows when a boat is going to be crossing the bridge, and then they can be prepared for that and make sure there are just no trains coming through the bridge at that time, so that no trains will get delayed because of it. I believe this method is done at the drawbridge near Newark Penn Station. They schedule 24 hours in advance before opening it. After this, the tracks will travel in the tunnel. Right now I'm trying to figure out if you can even attach a bridge to a tunnel in this game. It looks like the tunnel is compatible enough that you can attach it, but there's a slight problem with the track alignment. That would obviously cause a derailment. Something's going to have to be done about that. Because it only works if the track is curved sharply to the left. Yeah, that would derail a train traveling at nearly 200 miles per hour. So something's going to have to be done about that. It turns out, though, the only real problem is that the tunnel itself isn't straight. Straightening the tunnel will make it so that you can attach it to a bridge without any issues. I don't remember if or if not you could attach a tunnel to a bridge in the older versions of this game. Okay, I'm straightening the tunnel so that you can attach a bridge to it. Apparently it only works if they're perfectly straight. Okay, that looks pretty straight to me. Okay, it seems to be attached perfectly. I'm still gonna actually ride the train to make sure that it can go through this tunnel without derailing. Because a lot of times I build a tunnel and I think, oh, that looks good, and then there's a section where the train pokes through the wall. So I'm gonna actually ride the tunnel to make sure that doesn't happen. And speaking of which, I really wish the person who made the bullet trains for this game also made an interior so you could ride inside the passenger cars. That would actually be pretty cool. I was thinking of trying to create a bullet train interior myself so that you could ride in the cars, but that's for another time. Assuming I even can figure out how to make an interior. At one time I also wanted to create an Acela Express passenger car interior too. There was enough of a budget left after building this station to install concrete ties. So these are what the concrete ties will look like when the railroad can afford to install them. Now, some of the city streets had to be demolished to make way for the station because it's an open cut station. It's not underground. Some of the houses have been preserved though. They were simply moved out of the way when the hole was dug to build the station, and they'll be brought back to their original location whenever possible. However, houses that exist where the station currently is, if they couldn't get permission from the owner to move the house or demolish it, it will just be placed in a concrete block above the station, and a bridge will be built that allows people to walk to their house sitting exactly where it used to stand from the mainland. However, this now means that their house will be located right above a train station. Some of them might end up moving anyway and selling their house. If they do that, the railroad will be very quick to purchase it just so they can demolish it. A lot of the city streets still exist though. They expect Ocracoke Village to be a very popular stop, so they made this an 8-track express station. 4 southbound tracks and 4 northbound tracks. Local and express trains will stop here. Now, in order to keep the peace and quiet of the village, trains are not allowed to blow their horns when they're in the Ocracoke Village area. They can, however, blow their horns in a tunnel before approaching the station. They cannot blow their horns while in the station. Also, soundproof walls were built in the station in order to muffle the sound coming from the trains and the station as much as possible, so as not to disturb the villagers in the area. Also, sound deflectors were built above the station to try to deflect the sound back towards the station as much as possible. The goal here is to keep the village as quiet as possible, so as not to disturb them. Right now I'm looking for the right switches to go in this area. One of my mother's cousins was actually supposed to work in the World Trade Center. Her start date was set up for September 11th. However, it was postponed to a later date. So many of the switches in this game use the exact same sound effects over and over again. I like this one personally, but I wish that when some people made switch sounds, they would consider being more creative and coming up with their own junction sounds rather than just using the same built-in sounds from the game. I appreciate this one for being creative. You know, I'd be really surprised if YouTube doesn't demonetize this video, because I said the words September and 11th in it, and they generally don't like that. But darn it, I will not be censored! Oh, see, this junction still has this glitch where the sound keeps repeating. I can fix that, but I just don't want to. Or at least not right now. Either way, when I was a kid, someone actually gave me a toy that was a replica of a Boeing 737, and it had a American Airlines logo on it. I could not play with this toy plane after seeing what happened in the news. It felt almost disrespectful to do that. So no matter what, I just could not bring myself to play with this toy plane anymore. But I couldn't throw it away because it was a gift, and I feel like I'm disrespecting the person that gave the gift to me if I throw it away. I'm one of those people that just can't throw away gifts. So the plane is just gathering dust in a corner in my room. It actually has some scratch marks on it from when I tried to scrape the American Airlines logo off of it, but to no avail. They make those toy planes very strong. Anyway, originally I was using bullet train signals on my route, but I can't really do that here because in the United States, trains operate on the right-hand side of the tracks, especially passenger trains. Well, freight trains don't really matter, but passenger trains generally use the right-hand track. In Japan, they normally use the left-hand track because you drive on the left in Japan, so the trains also drive on the left. In fact, in most countries, they drive on the same side of the track that you use when driving on the road. Except the TGV for some reason. I don't know why it is. The TGV operates in France where they drive on the right side of the road, but the trains still use the left-hand track. Anyway, here I want the bullet trains to use the right-hand track because Americans are more familiar with that, and it will be easier for them to determine which platform to wait for the train on, which direction they're trying to go. So they're not going to be using Japanese style signals, which are for trains operating on the left-hand track. Instead, they'll be using American style signals, generally the TPL signals and the CPL signals. Well, that seems to be all the footage I have, so thanks for watching. Also, consider liking, subscribing, leaving a comment if you liked the video. You can also dislike it if you didn't like the video. Oh, and one other thing I forgot to mention. I really don't like it when people take selfies at the September 11th memorial in New York City. It really gets on my nerves. It feels disrespectful. Like, it was not built for you to take pictures of yourself at and go, oh, look at me standing next to this thing. It was built to honor the people who lost their lives at this tragic event. So I really don't think anyone should be taking selfies in front of it. I just hate when people do that. I feel like they don't understand the meaning behind this memorial.